Hello and welcome to SonicLAB. I'm Gaz Williams and today we're looking at Cubase Pro 11. Now this was released in November, but I wanted to spend a bit of time with it really in some real world settings because there's quite a lot to get through here. So we'll start though first by looking at improvements to the score editor. So if we were to open up a part here into the score editor, one of the first things you can do, I mean, this is fairly subtle, but in the settings, we can now choose our score fonts and, so you can bring in ones from Dorico, for instance, Petaluma. I think what is of more significant note, though, up here is the thing called Note Editing Overlay. So we'll enable that. And now we can see wherever the mouse is hovering above a particular bar, then we get these, what are more like kind of piano roll elements underneath. So I could change the duration of notes. You can see adding ties on there. Or, if I choose the V here, I can edit velocities. And then in a familiar kind of MIDI editing way. So I think that could be pretty cool. But I mentioned the piano roll because that was one of the very first things in Steinberg's Cubase when it first came out in 1989. And that has had some significant updates. So I've opened it here in what's called the lower zone, but I'm going to pop that out so it becomes full screen. Now, one of the first things is global tracks are now available within this editor. So I had the chord track showing there, which is great because now, and those chord tracks are fully editable within the editor, the key editor. If we were to open up other tracks here, I'm going to sort of say, we'll have a marker track. Let's add a marker track. The tempo track. Now that one is, let's add that one. That one certainly will be of use. And we can have all of them on or choose which ones, the only ones that you want to see. And again, it's all editable as well in here. But let's stay in the key editor for a moment because there's a bunch of other enhancements. The pitch bend. Finally, what we can do now is we can snap pitch bend events. If you put in events like so, then what you can do, which is superb, is now you can grab and you can change the curves. So but yeah, you get the gist. So these adjustable curves now will make a lot of people who spend irritating time with tons and tons of little editing points will be super thankful. And it's not just pitch bend that gets those edits. All CC edit lanes also benefit from those curves. For instance, now if I was to add pan and then yeah, same thing here. So I can add in points and then, yeah, adjust that curve. But possibly one of the coolest new additions to the key editor is the scale assistant. Let's have a look. So we find that on the left here, and then we can do two things here. We can either have it choose a scale of our own picking, or we can have choose to use the chord track. Now this is especially cool. Now we've got the global tracks, including the chord track, available within our editor. And some of these options here show scale note guides. These darker lines which are intersecting the piano roll are showing us notes which are not allowed compared to the lighter notes which are allowed. A little bit difficult to see on this particular screen. But we've also got snap pitch editing. So that doesn't matter too much because with that enabled, it will only allow us to drop notes into allowable places. And if I choose chords, it becomes a little bit more obvious to demonstrate. So I'll create a note here. Let's just drag it out a little bit. And as I move this up and down, it's only picking notes from within D minor. But then here, A minor with the C bass, B flat major 7, E flat major 7. So you can see with having note preview on as well, how you can move those around and hear them all, those notes all be all legitimate within the chords. Let's just take away that note. Let's listen to those chords. This is a little key change here to the A sharp major. Okay. So if I was to play along, I've got plugged in here a Launchpad X. And what I'll do is I'll just do a simple little repetitive pattern, and I won't change what notes I'm playing here. I'll let Cubase kind of fold the notes I'm playing to make sure that they stay in key. Let's drop it into record. So I could like group select those now, and then by dragging a copy of them, I could create harmonies. These notes are a bit low here, so I'll just drag them. So it's kind of cool. And again, you know, these chords, I can change these chords, change that B flat. In fact, let's make a more obvious thing. Let's make it A minor. The notes change as I change the chord, that they automatically are changing. So as you'd expect, there are some new plugins which come with Cubase Pro 11, 3 of which that manipulate sound and 1 which just purely displays sound. More of that in a moment. But the 3 that make sounds are all really interesting because they can all be used in a mastering kind of situation. Let's take a look now. So here I've got one open that's called Squasher. Now, Squasher, it says, is great for EDM, but of course you could use it for anything. And it's essentially a 3-band, or up to 3 bands. You can control how many bands there are. Compressor, limiter. Well, there's a few things that make it interesting. One is that you've got like an upwards ratio and a downwards ratio. So essentially you can control how much you want to limit how loud things get, but also you can limit how quiet things get. So you can hence squash it together and reduce drastically the dynamic range within a song. I'm using a slightly modified preset, Master Bus Tight. And what this is quite good for is, well, we can see here that we've reduced quite a lot of the quieter sounds in all 3 frequency bands and limited the tops a little bit too. Now, this particular song that I've got from my band Rocket Gold Star, one of the problems with it, and you can see here, is that it's a very dynamic song. It goes from this at the beginning. Why'd you write such sad songs? To this at the end. That's where something like Squasher can work. So let's have a listen. So here we'll see me switch it in. Here, it's it in. And out. Sister asked me what's wrong. Yeah. Why'd you write such sad songs? Each band has got a mix level. Bring them all out. So I'm increasing the bass, increasing the mids, and increasing the treble. Bypass. Now let's open another of the new plugins. Now, we've seen this before, frequency, but this is now frequency 2. And what frequency 2 has gained is a dynamic element. So it's essentially a dynamic EQ now, and each of the bands, and there's 8 of them, can all have their own dynamic processing. And here we're looking at all 8 bands. But if we change the view to single, we can select each individual band. And from here, we can enable the dynamics and the sidechain. And as I mentioned earlier, you've got multiple sidechains. And because there's 8 EQ bands here, we can have 8 different sidechains feeding this. Now, I'm not quite sure why you might need 8, but the fact you can is quite interesting. We'll investigate that in a moment too. And frequency, it's quite easy to overlook frequency because, you know, the standard EQ is pretty good in Cubase, but frequency really is a mastering quality effect, you can engage linear phase processing on a per channel basis. Now, this is great. Something that I'm really into doing on masters is applying little bits of dynamic EQ. It's a kind of subtle thing, but I find it's really effective for putting some kind of energy and life into the track. Without
hurt yourself with both hands. That was stupid and bad.
Without the squasher.
Tea with water, yeah.
Nice. So if I turn off,
Pleasant voices take you back.
that's our unmastered track now.
Sweet dreams, nice thoughts, always.
So I mentioned earlier about multiple sidechains. Let's have a look at that. So here we got a little tune playing. Okay, let's have a look what's going on here. So we've got frequency 2 going on. Now I've got this like enormous big cut here. Frequency band 1 is being fed a sidechain from the kick. So when the kick is present, it's going to cross the threshold, and then that's going to duck the EQ in that frequency. And similarly in band 2, the clap. So every time the clap happens, it's just going to give a little boost there to anything in the treble range. Now, the way I did this, if we just click on the setup sidechaining here, now we can set up to 8 different sidechains, and each sidechain can be fed by more than one signal. So here in sidechain 1 is being fed from the kick, and then sidechain 2 is being fed from the clap. But also, like, I could go to sidechain 1, for instance, add sidechain source. I could put the bass guitar in there as well. So the bass guitar action is going to help sort of bring the bass end of that drum loop down a little bit. Having multiple sidechains can open up all sorts of kind of creative opportunities within your mix. So that just brings us to the third and final one of our effects, which are, as I say, based on sound. And this is the imager, which is dealing with stereo images, and again is a multi-band. In this case, we've got 4 bands here, and we can change that. So we can choose, we can just have it on a single band, or let's try this on 3 bands. Each band gives us like a phase meter, and there's like a stereograph here, and adjustable width, pan, and overall output. So what you might typically want to do is narrow the bass and broaden the treble. That's something that you might want to do in a mastering situation, preparing sounds for vinyl, for instance. Like I can make the bass mono all the way to the left here, make it really wide in the top end, bypass. Yeah, well, that's way too much, really. But what we're going to do, though, we're going to have a look at the 4th plugin that I mentioned, the one that doesn't make any sound, and that's called Supervision. And Supervision is a meter, really, but a meter with a difference. Let's open this up. And if I play the track, it defaults to just a very simple meter. But if we look in our presets here, we've got all sorts of different ones. So music editing, and then music mastering. Now let's try the music mastering, because that's what we're doing in this particular case. And now we've got
Pleasant voices,
stereo information, phase, spectrograph, Another new feature of Cubase 11 is the inclusion of Spectralyers 1. Now, Spectralyers is a standalone editor. The standalone version is up to version 7, but Spectralyers 1 is like a cut down version that comes included with Cubase. What can we use it for? Well, this is pretty nice. Let's have a look. So typically, if I was to click on an audio file, it'll open down here. But if I wanted to, I could choose an extension. And I've got Melodyne and Spectralyers installed, so I'll choose Spectralyers. And now if I was to click on the audio file, what it will do is it will open it up into Spectralyers along the bottom here. Now I can break that open into a full screen. To those of you who are familiar with Isotope RX, it's along similar lines here where we can edit the audio via a spectral display. Now, one of the features that's particularly cool, and really the one I can imagine most people are going to use, is this unmix vocals. So what I've got, this track is a full mixdown, a Rocket Gold Star mixdown. If I click unmix vocals, and I'll leave the sensitivity at 0 for now. I click OK. It says here, unmixing stems. Now this is kind of a little bit of a weirdy voodoo kind of thing, because it's going to a stereo mix down and it's pulling out the vocal. I've got the original mix as well, so we can actually compare the vocal, the extracted vocal, and the original vocal. So here now, it should sound like the full track.
Down to the hyper launch, I thrust my way down to the front.
So you can hear it does a really good job. I mean, there's always going to be some sort of artifact. Let's solo the vocals.
You do what you can't say no. Get up, dawn, and clear the snow. Hurry down to the hyper launch. I thrust my way down to the front. Relentlessly inelegant, yes.
And here's the original vocal, just for comparison.
You do what you can't say no. Get up, dawn, and clear the snow. Hurry down to the hyper launch.
Right, so we can see that it's doing a pretty good job.
You do what you can't say no. Get up, dawn, and clear.
And here, just a tiny little bit of some sibilance coming through here. Now we can get in and get our hands dirty if we want to, but I'll keep that for another video because I think there's a lot to explore within Spectralyers. But straight away, that's a very useful tool. Especially if you just want to adjust the relative levels, we can just drag them into our project. Let's solo these new tracks.
Phantom phone vibration.
Bring the vocal level down. Yeah, so if I wanted to, I could go back to a song from way back when, before Autotune even existed, go into it and then edit the pitches and actually sort out any issues and then recombine it. Steinberg have included loads of new sample content with Cubase 11. Now that's not something I'd normally get that excited about, but because of the enhancements to the sampler track, as we'll see shortly, it means that any audio is fair game for warping and twisting way beyond its original form. Let's have a look at this then. So first thing we're going to do is I'm going to open up the sidebar here and I'm going to look at loops and samples. And here they are. We've got Bloom, Tech House, Hard Knocks, Lo-Fi Dreams, Night Call, Noir, Soul Assembly, EDM toolboxes from a previous version. Now these don't come installed, pre-installed, but you have to use the Steinberg download assistant to choose to download them as additional content. Nice and easy. I'm glad Steinberg have employed that method. If I put the track on with a click track on and we listen to any of these samples, they play back in time. Oh, let's get some tasty roads lines, I reckon. That might be quite nice. Okay. That'll do. So turn off metronome, and then I'm going to right click and go create sampler track. And then here it is now in sampler track. And if we have a look with our connected launchpad, let's arm the track. And then as you'd imagine, the sample pitches up, depending which note I'm playing. But like, you know, I could change the quality here. I could go to vintage and get a kind of crunchier. And in fact, you can choose which turntable it's sampled off, a 45 or even a 78. I think now though, we'll just keep it on standard. And one of the things that's new is if we enable monophonic mode, meaning, but now we can turn legato mode on. So what happens with legato mode is when the sample plays, the next sample, so long as I'm holding the note down, it won't re-trigger from the start, but trigger from wherever the sample had got to. But what is new as well is the ability to slice our samples. Let's bring in a drum beat for this. Okay, so take that for instance. Create a sampler track, creates a new sampler track. Let's arm that one. And now again, same behavior. But now what we'll do is we'll go to slice, and the default is slicing to transients. So we can do it that way, or we could go and slice to grid. Let's go to eighths. Just going to put it back to transients. And, you know, all of these are adjustable. If we go to these arrows here, it says transfer to a new instrument. So if we select that, and it says transfer to Groove Agent SE, all our samples are all mapped automatically. There is actually two new LFOs which are available. If we look in the mod here, we can see here's LFO1 and LFO2, and then there's various destinations available as well. So you can get plenty of things moving around. So the last thing we're going to look at is the job queue. Now this doesn't sound particularly exciting, but depending on what you use Cubase for, if you work perhaps in soundtrack work or making assets for a computer game or all sorts of other reasons, then this could be a huge time saver. I mean, not just that, we'll see now. So I've got a mix here. I've got the locators set up. So we would normally, this is what we've normally used, the familiar export audio window. But down the bottom here, export queue. Let's open this up. I'm going to be creating an unmastered mix here at 48K 24-bit. Great, that's fine. So before I render it, I'll actually add this to the queue. So let's add that to the queue. Now, I might actually want like a much smaller version, like an MP3, so it could be shared, and I'll add that to the queue as well. Yeah, cool. So rather than having to render off a mix and then create an MP3, I can do both in the same time, but it gets better than that. I could go multiple, and I could choose, I could bounce out some stems at the same time here. So if I click the little chain, then this is kind of cool. What this allows me to do then is go back and to select my drums and my percussion and my bass, and I'll have my guitar and the keys, but I'll leave the vocals off. I'll just say this is just for instrumental remix. And now I'll add those to the queue now. Great. So it'll bounce out all of those files in one, but there's more. Let's go back to single. And now this time I'm going to go cycle markers. Now I've created a bunch of cycle markers. I've got one for the intro, verse, chorus. So we'll add that to the queue now as well, like so. So once all that's done, I then go down and click Start Queue Export. And then what will happen then? All of those jobs will be done. So that just about wraps up our look at Cubase Pro 11, and all of those features is quite a lot when you put it all together. And apart from the ones we've mentioned, there's a number of little smaller ones. Again, if you go to the Steinberg website, you'll find a full list of everything. But hope you've enjoyed this. This has been a SonicLAB special looking at Cubase Pro 11 with me, Gaz Williams. Catch you in the next video. Bye-bye.